SEO for Shopify. In today's Learning SEO, we have a guest who's an expert in SEO for e-commerce, and in particular with Shopify, because he used to work there. Hello, Kevin. How are you?
Hey, everyone. Great. Glad to be doing this. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much for joining. Kevin Indig is now an SEO consultant, but he used to work at Shopify. To enter directly into the topic, we know that Shopify has positioned itself as the main player for online stores, e-commerce out there. It provides different type of functionalities to give a full solution beyond the basics. What would you say are still today the type of websites that you will think that will benefit the most on using Shopify?
That's a good question, because when you look at how Shopify started, the idea was really to provide a platform that anybody can start on. So there are many e-commerce platforms out there, and most of them require some technical expertise to set them up. And the idea behind Shopify was always that anybody could start an online store, like even without any technical or marketing skills. And you can still feel that in Shopify's DNA today. Now, they also have an enterprise product, Shopify Plus, and other solutions. So you can scale from a single person all the way up to hundreds of people with some of the biggest store, thousands maybe. But that's kind of one of the core pillars of Shopify is you can scale all the way up and you can get started anytime. The other thing that is a result of that is that Google and SEO is just one of many surfaces, right? So the idea behind Shopify is that sure, you have a website, you have channels like Google, Pinterest, Instagram, TikTok, Meta, all of these. But it is a channel agnostic platform, right? So it's not built for SEO specifically or built for social or built for paid. You can pick and choose what works best for you, right? And so you see that there are many different types of Shopify customers, from local restaurants who want to sell merchandise to Mr. Beast, right? Like influencers, creators who want to sell their products on an online store or on YouTube, for example. And then you also have even aggregators of products who want to sell a wide range of different brands and are more like a marketplace. So I'm going to pause there because there's so much more to say, but I hope that gives a little bit of a feeling for where Shopify came from and how to think about it as a product.
So it eliminates the initial burden of having to set an online store 100%. Now, entering into the SEO area in which we will focus, what would you say tend to be those configurations that you see to be not well used, misconfigured even at some point by SEOs? Because indeed, I believe that one of those features that right now are taking more and more into account, let's say, right at the beginning, is like, oh, Shopify already by default offers all of these options and is supporting many more SEO features than, for example, pre-pandemic. I remember that pre-pandemic, it didn't even allow to edit the robots.txt, right?
Yeah.
Lang annotations restrictions, canonicalization restrictions, and now it allows to configure a lot of the core elements in SEO in a very straightforward way, right? Which can also eliminate the burden of optimizing the core elements or the core areas of the site. What would you say are those areas or elements that you see that people don't leverage as well or not use as well?
Yeah, it's a good point you make there, Alida, because that's true. There are more SEO features and former SEO problems that are now solved natively or that you can solve with an app. So there's a lot of development, but there's still some things that are often missed. One of them is to not have reviews on the site, and of course use structured data to get review-rich snippets. Those are, in my mind, absolutely critical in e-commerce or any e-commerce related keywords. You want to have those little stars that show the ratings, how many people reviewed the product. And for that, you need reviews on your site and you need to use structured data. The other thing is that a lot of people miss and go too subtle on all the information that's on a product page. So product description is one that I often see being either copied from, I mean, depends on how you set up your store. If you have your own product that you manufacture or let someone else manufacture, then people typically write product descriptions that are too short. If they sell a third-party product, then they often copy paste the description of the merchant or of the manufacturer. And so you want to have unique product description, lengthy product description. You want to make sure that you include all the important aspects of the product, like what's the material, what's the size, what do you need to know, how does it fit, right? There's so many different questions that people have. And that leads me to the third point, which is you want to have some Q&A on your product page. So commonly asked questions that people have, and you can either make them up or it can talk to your customers, or you use some apps that allow you to send short form surveys to customers and then ask them, hey, what did you like? What did you not like? You know, what are some important questions you have about the product? Another important one that is often forgotten is to add a search box to your store. It's kind of meta, but you want to make it easy for people to find things. And you also want to be able to log the keywords and questions that people enter into that search box to then see if you want to create content for these questions, or if you have a product page for a certain variant, if people search for that type of stuff. So you get a lot of meta information from the search boxes. And then you also mentioned that a lot of stuff already comes out of the box with Shopify. And one of the most important things in e-commerce to do, obviously, is to set up the Google Merchant Center. With Shopify, when you install the Google and YouTube app, it will automatically synchronize with the Google Merchant Center. And that's a pretty cool feature. So you don't need to set that up yourself. You just need to install that Google and YouTube app. And then Shopify will by default send all of the product information to the Google Merchant Center, which is super critical for organic listings, or if you run, organic shopping listings, that is, or if you run paid shopping campaigns, then you will have a lot of that information out of the box as well. Now, a couple of things are important to keep in mind. One is you want to optimize your product descriptions and title. It's kind of, you want to do that anyway from an SEO perspective, but especially for the Merchant Center, you want to keep in mind that it's, there's some sort of description in the title. You have some aspects like unique value proposition or dimensions or those kind of things in the title, so that also carries over to the Google Merchant feed. And then two things that are critical are the product category. So Google is super adamant about having one category for the product, which you can simply define in the Shopify admin interface. And then there is a GTIN number, which is something like a unique product identifier. And that is also critical for Google Merchant Center. So if you forget that, you'll have like an error in your Merchant Center, and Google might not show your product. So these are two critical things to include. And then optionally, but nice to have, are to run discounts and promotions, which would then also carry over to the Google Merchant Center and show up in Google's product listings, whether they're organic or paid, and they catch a lot of attention. So that's super important. And then go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Now that you're mentioning different facets and categories and products IDs, etc., one of the things that I tend to see still from time to time, and it would be great if you can share a few insights of what you saw in your day at Shopify internally, and also what would you say is the best way to tackle it still today is product duplication, right? Just because of featuring the same products across different collections or categories, subcategories. Of course, we have canonical tags to try to, let's say, patch this, although this is definitely not an ideal solution, because we will still publish content that is not indexable. And if we start growing, right, for budget, we'll end up not necessarily having or being the best within the website on one hand, and then on the other hand, at the end, like canonical tags are perform as signals, right? If at some point a non-indexable variant of a product URL ends up getting tons of backlinks for some reason, or we still link to them internally, they might end up being picked up by Google rather than the variant that we want to keep as original, right? Like, what would you say are your recommendations to handle well categorization and avoid the whole co-budget hassle to trying to minimize the overusage of, let's say, the canonical tag for this?
So by default, the Shopify URLs, they can lead to duplicate content if one product is in separate categories. But if, for example, you have a headless Shopify setup, then that problem should not occur because you can define the categories yourself. Or if you want to alter the URL structure with Cloudflare Workers, which is one of the few instances where I actually recommend that, then you can make sure that logic is not being applied, right? Where you don't have the different categories in the product URL, but you just have a single primary category in the product URL. And even if it appears in another category, it's not getting another dedicated URL.
Or ideally, not add the product URL to any category. That can be something doable to configure in Shopify, right?
Yes, absolutely. You can assign that.
Perfect. So it's something that you should be aware of, because we are going to talk about all the aspects that you might or might not necessarily have to deal with, but with products URLs, we always have products on an e-commerce, right? So let's talk about apps, the plugins for Shopify. Like, there has been this boom, this popularization. Also, I have seen that there were plugins in the past that were offering features that are now even natively provided more and more through Shopify. We also have now other very popular plugins that we have been using already for a while in SEO, like Yoast, also for Shopify. What are those plugins that you think that actually make sense to use because they provide features that are not natively supported or offered by Shopify at this point?
Yeah, totally. I have Yoast on my list as well. Obviously, a great app. But to take a step back, a good point you mentioned there, Leda, is when you work for one of these platforms, you always wonder, okay, how much should we do natively and how much should we allow the ecosystem to provide? And it's very difficult because you want a thriving ecosystem around your product, but you also, want to have, you want to be conscious about the cost that merchants have to occur, right, or pay for a lot of these apps. So there's a balance, right, where they get what they need out of the box, but you also have a thriving ecosystem, because that ecosystem essentially makes your product way more modular, and might add capabilities that you don't want to build natively, or not force people to use natively. So there are all sorts of like very complex decisions that go into this. But to answer your actual questions, Yoast is definitely a great one for just overall SEO, for overall search optimization. You can do all sorts of cool things. I'm going to talk about some of them in a moment. But one super important aspect of e-commerce SEO is image optimization. Super critical. And there, my favorite app is CrushPicks. For reviews that I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of really good ones. There's Judge Me, there is Okendo, there's Revio, and I'm happy to have like a whole list here. I'm happy to copy paste it into the chat or send it afterwards, so people don't have to take notes but can just check them out. For sitemaps, XML and HTML sitemaps, there is Mapify, there's Sitemapper Pro, there's SEO Sitemap Builder. And by the way, building an HTML sitemap is something that I would suggest for Shopify users and e-commerce in general, just to make sure that there are internal links to all the products and categories, and even for users, it's sometimes helpful for them to see a clean list of all the different pages. And then if you have search filters, right? If you have category pages with many products and you want to provide functionality for your users to filter through these products, there is an app called Boost AI Search and Filter, which has some pretty cool features. And then lastly, if you want to define title tags, right? If you have a lot of again, products, and you want to test different title tags or just streamline all the title tags to use the same template, there is you can use Yoast, which does a great job of that, or there is SEO Meta Manager. And as I mentioned earlier, so I provided a couple of different options for apps here. And if I had been working at Shopify, then I probably wouldn't have been able to name specific apps because we want to be very neutral to that app ecosystem. But since I haven't been at Shopify now for over a year, I feel comfortable calling out some of my favorite apps. But of course, it's a thriving ecosystem. New ones come out all the time. And it might be that next week there's another really cool app that does some great things that I haven't mentioned here. So just be conscious of that.
Yeah, of course. What it will be important at the end of the day is to, with all of the insights that you have provided, and also what is provided natively versus what isn't, that we focus on those that actually like provide value for our particular context and are easier for us to manage, also given our own situation, right? That 100%. Regarding templates and designs, right? We know that there has been this popularization of the usage of client-side render, JavaScript, frameworks and designs, many of them with this very sophisticated look and feel, right? Unfortunately, I'm always afraid, like whenever there's something new, like the first thing that I do is I disable JavaScript from the browser and see what actually is shown without JavaScript to ensure that, yeah, it looks amazing, but I still need to ensure that at least the main basic navigation and configuration is still there. What would you say are your favorite at this point, that you know that are also fast, that don't, let's say, overload necessarily what necessarily, like, for example, configurations or the overusage of JavaScript or CSS, that it's loaded, that is not even used, or that is not pre-rendered, that etc. etc. What will you say are the top ones that you will suggest to check it out?
At Shopify, we're super conscious of page speeds and all the metrics and facets around page speed in general. It's obviously super important for e-commerce, but also from an SEO perspective, something that we were very closely measuring. And I was very lucky to work with Ilya Grigorik at Shopify, who is one of the godfathers of Core Web Vitals when he worked at Google for over a decade. And we had a very thorough conversation about speed and everything that goes into speed. And we also had internal dashboards at Shopify where we measured how every theme impacts the speed of different stores. So we had a very clear idea. But again, it's tough when you have a whole ecosystem of themes and theme developers, and then they say ranking them by speed, for example, like it's tough to be subjective in that situation and not shoot yourself in the foot. So my 4 favorite Shopify themes for page speed. One is Minimal. That's one of the standard themes, but it's super lean. Same as Narrative, Brooklyn, and Sense. Sense is relatively new. Looks a bit more flashy with transient backgrounds and all that kind of stuff, but it's very, very lean. So these 4 themes, Minimal, Brooklyn, Narrative, and Sense, they all come with the minimal amount of scripts, or JavaScript in general, and they're all cut out like some of the best ranks when it comes to internal page speed monitoring.
Amazing. This is great. What about international websites, right? I know that these are one of those areas in which Shopify had been focusing on to provide more support, because back in the day, you pretty much had to, let's say, edit out the code to set and to implement the hreflang tags in a way that actually made sense and work together with other variants of your website, up to which point is now supported the usage of hreflang annotations, not only for different ccTLDs, but also if you wish to use subdomains or subdirectories as country or language variants of your website, up to which point is there flexibility right now to do it so?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in e-commerce, it's more prevalent to use ccTLDs. I have a very strong preference for subdirectories. That's my experience and the data that I've seen.
Authority, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this one of these never-ending debates in SEO, which I don't know why, but if you want to upset a bunch of SEOs, just ask what's better, subdomain or subdirectory on Twitter, and you'll get a lot of engagement. So here's a little social hack for you. But in all honesty, so subdirectories is the way to go. So Shopify Markets is the native way to set all of that up, and it's not just from a URL perspective, but it's also from all the logistics, right? So native currency, translation in languages, all that kind of stuff. So Shopify Markets is kind of the app that you want to go with if you want to go international. And the one critical thing that I see a lot of merchants doing wrong is that they set up auto geo redirects, which means that if you, for example, you sell in the US and you sell to Canada, and you want to, for whatever reason, go to the Canadian version of the store, but you're in the US, you would automatically be redirected to the US. And that's a mistake in my experience. You want to avoid auto geo redirects, also in Google's documentation, by the way. And you can simply change that in the admin interface. So if you go to settings, markets, there are preferences where you can toggle automatic redirection on or off. And my suggestion is to toggle it off so that people can freely choose where they want to go. Now, you still want to have a flag in your top nav, or at least in the footer, where people can select the market. And there are apps to show people a banner at the top of the store if they come from a different country where you have a local store version. So you can tell them, hey, I noticed you browse from the US, you're in the Canadian store. We also have a US store, right? So you can direct visitors to the local store, but you shouldn't automatically redirect them. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I've noticed.
Let's talk again a little bit about product pages, right? Because these are the ones that tend to have a little bit of more of an issue because of how dynamic they tend to be. And I also know that Shopify provides a way to set rules that will help with the crawlability and indexability if a product goes out of stock and it's not available temporarily or permanently, right? What are your recommendations or those key features or areas that you will recommend people to take a look at whenever setting a new online store to ensure that it plays well with our inventory, right? That you're not just showing a 404 in your product page that got or was getting a lot of backlinks until then, or that you kind of want to redirect to the right page or to the right category page or facet that is actually indexable, and you are redirecting somewhere that is not indexable anyway.
So there are two ways that you can go about this. One is you can set if-then clauses in the Liquid code. Relatively straightforward. It's not super complicated. The biggest challenge there is to just define the rules as you laid them out just right now, right? Like what happens if this is the case or that is the case. But the Liquid code is very flexible and agile and will allow you to write these rules relatively easily. The other way is to go with Cloudflare Workers. I personally found Workers to be super universal for any of these redirect rules or state changes, where you can define that if the page hits a certain state or is in a certain condition, then that's how you want to change the HTTP header or some of the meta tags on that page. So typically Liquid code if-then clauses or Cloudflare Workers.
Amazing. Perfect. Yeah, I will say that I actually use Cloudflare for a lot of my websites, but I prefer to handle, let's say, core functionality that just for governance, right? Like it should work like that. Whatever is at the let's say CDN level, for me it should be like a little bit hacky or workaround or additional layer. Sometimes it shouldn't, right? But the user don't see the right version necessarily, or that we want or might not. So if it is something core or should be core for the website, I truly believe that it should be better on implemented directly on the website itself. Of course, if I say, like, I know that there are people who are super keen on maximizing, like even building everything or configuring everything through leveraging workers, right? But yeah, so like just for governance and accessibility and not having to rely on DevOps too much, because at the end of the day, yes, we eliminate the burden from the devs, but then our let's say hosting management or CDN management becomes a little bit of more of a burden with so many rules too. That for sure.
Sure. Yeah, you have to keep the overview. You have to have proper documentation, all that kind of stuff with Workers. It is, and you open another playing field. So that's a good point. I guess like one meta point to make at this point is that most of the time when you want to get the most out of Shopify SEO, you will probably have to touch liquid code. So the native code language that Shopify is built on. It takes a little bit to get into, but if you spend a couple hours just understanding the basics of Liquid, it's actually quite powerful, and it's a very high level language. So it's not too complicated. It might seem a bit overwhelming at first look, but again, if you look at it, like if you take a bit of time to play with it, it's actually quite nice, and you can solve a lot of recurring, I would say, annoyances or challenges right in the code, where you define it once for a template, almost similar to WordPress. And then you'll have solved that problem on every page. One example is the canonicalization. I know that there's some weird things with how the canonicalization is set up, and it's not always super crawl budget friendly. And there's a simple script that you can copy paste into the liquid code to solve that issue. And there's a lot of things like, to your point, right, setting up URL rules or product rules that you can define in the liquid code. So my suggestion is, if you know that you will touch Shopify stores a lot and optimize them, it might make sense to invest a couple of hours and learn the basics of liquid code, and maybe put together a little cheat sheet for yourself in a Google Doc or in a Notion page or so, where you collect some of these copy paste templated scripts that you can then just add to a store whenever you optimize a new store. That's actually what I've done for myself, where I have like a little cheat sheet with a couple scripts that I can copy paste over, and then solve some of these recurring challenges instead of, as to your point, instead of going to Cloudflare Workers.
Yes, I will say, I mean, Cloudflare Workers are like, they are there for whatever type of website or CMS anyway, but if we can directly, and also there's an option to configure that directly within the code of the website, then 100% it's better to go with it directly. Robots.txt, let's talk about it, because a few years back, it was not even allowed to be edited because, and I believe that there was even a tweet about this from the founder of Shopify, right? Thankfully, it is now editable. What are the usual edits that you will recommend people to do for whenever using Shopify, besides the usual, right? Like adding the XML sitemaps, potentially blocking internal search results, URLs, to avoid wasting any crawl budget, crawlability on these URLs that are not meant to be indexable anyway. What else?
Yeah, totally. So a couple things. Obviously, images, right? Like you want to have like descriptive image file names and alt text, all that kind of stuff. We already spoke about title templates and streamlining those kind of things. There's another really important aspect of when you start a Shopify store from scratch, which is that every Shopify store first has a domain under myshopify.com. It's like an old legacy setup, but long story short, you can make sure that any variation of your domain redirects to your primary domain, right? So I assume that in probably every case, you'll not go with the My Shopify domain, but you'll have a custom domain set up. And you can go into the Shopify settings under online store and domains. And there's a little checkbox that says enable redirection. And if you click that, then Shopify will just automatically use any variation of your domain, including the My Shopify domain, and redirect that to the primary domain. And if you go to that section under the domain settings and it says traffic from all your domains redirects to this primary domain, then you know that your setup is correct. That's another one of these things that are often forgotten. In regards to other setups, right, there's obviously like all sorts of specific things you can do with your XML sitemaps, whether it's indicating hreflang or specific like video sitemaps, structuring and segmenting XML sitemaps. There are apps, some of which I mentioned, that allow you to do that if you want to take it to that level. And then all the other stuff is just about custom content on the pages, right? So as I mentioned earlier, I think that's one of the most forgotten things, or one of the things that are they're done wrong most of the time. So you just want to make sure that you have as much custom, unique content with key piece of information on your page as possible.
Yeah, regarding that, I saw that also Shopify is integrating more and more AI-related functionalities, right, to help people to create content into their pages. But again, we know as SEOs too that there's only up to a certain point in which is actually smart to rely on it, and we always need to ensure that the content is actually unique, it is actually useful, accurate, factual, especially when we're selling a product, right? Like, what are the tips that you can give there? I don't know if you have seen any examples of websites already or out there, online stores, leveraging it successfully, potential workflows that you have seen online stores using to ensure quality too?
Yeah, that's really the key question. And I like to draw a comparison to how we did SEO before AI. So let's say, for example, the meta description, right? Like it still makes sense to invest in good meta descriptions. Now with AI, you can have something in your meta descriptions at scale very quickly. So if you optimize a store with, say, I don't know, like 100 SKUs or 100 products, there's going to be a lot of work going into writing custom meta descriptions. So the old school way was to define a template with some variables, and then you just customize these variables to the product and upload these meta descriptions. Now, the new approach is obviously to use AI for that. But in my experience, AI generated descriptions or AI generated content is still not as good as human generated content. It depends a little bit on, how much time you invest and how much data you have in the background. But let's just say broadly, AI generated content is not as good as human generated content, but it's still better than templated content or no content, right? So you have that hierarchy where at the top you have human generated content, below you have AI, below that you have templated content, and below that you have no content, which when I say content, I mean descriptions, on-page content, product descriptions, anything, right? So the way I would go about it is, if you start from scratch, use AI for all of these things, but then start optimizing the most important products, say by revenue or by traffic, manually, right? Like revise that content, fact check it, review it, and all that kind of stuff, which is not super important in e-commerce, but just manually optimize it step by step, but prioritize it by the products or pages that drive the most revenue and drive the most traffic. And that's how I would leverage it in a helpful way. Because, Shopify AI is still an early product. It is helpful and useful, but it can sometimes make the content seem a bit more generic or a bit more robotic. So add that human flavor and prioritize it by traffic and revenue.
I believe that is true in whatever content we do now that, we have AI functionality everywhere. I will say it's more true than ever. That is the content that can shows that actual human touch and real let's say expertise behind of a human, the one that will end up giving the best possible experience and connect better with the needs of user at the end of the day, rather than that generic templated one. Like the thing is, like, it has really improved, right? But sometimes and you can tell after a while, after you read a lot of this type of content and descriptions, like, okay, it's the way that is written. It's like, you tend to identify it that it's not necessarily genuine, right? Or how a real human will write about something like that in that particular context, right? Potentially because of it's too sophisticated many times.
Yeah, exactly. Too sophisticated. And you want to do two things. This is important from an SEO and from a marketing perspective. But we know that user engagement is important, brand building is important. And you want to, first of all, you want to catch attention. And you catch attention by standing out a bit, having your own unique voice, maybe some wordplays or puns or a little bit of personality. And the other thing is you want to stand out and you want people to memorize your store. And that starts with the experience in the search results, and it carries over all the way to, the confirmation email that people get in their inbox after they ordered your product. And these things matter for SEO. They matter more indirectly, passively, but they matter. And that is something that machines cannot create in the same subtle, interesting way that humans can. And that's why it's important.
100%. Thank you very much Kevin, I really, really appreciate all these insights. It has been quite useful, and I believe that we have tackled the major questions and doubts that we will tend to have whenever using Shopify for the first time for online stores. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining our today's edition. And remember to subscribe to the channel to avoid missing any other future videos. Thank you very much. Until the next edition. Bye-bye.